Hey YouTube, I'm Joe McLean. Welcome to my shop. I'm building a customized 1956 Studebaker pickup inspired by the Rod and Custom Dream Truck that was owned by Spence Murdy and featured extensively in Rod and Custom magazine in the late 1950s and early 1960s. The truck made a big impression on me, and this is my homage to that. I am not building a clone. This is just a custom pickup based on a Studebaker truck that will use a lot of the same styling cues and same customizing techniques as the original. So in previous episodes, I had built the outer firewall, steering column mounts, and hood hinges. And when I originally built the truck, or started building the truck 20 years ago, I had built an outer firewall, I had built this recess, and at some point I realized that I had made the recess too big. It was another inch or two further back into the cab, and it was at least 3 or 4 or 5 inches wider on each side. And the reason I made it that large is because I needed clearance over here for the headers and for the back spark plug, and I wanted enough clearance to be able to get the engine in and out without a lot of trouble. The problem is, with as large as this firewall recess was, there was no way I was going to put a gas pedal and a brake pedal and 2 size 13 feet in the space that was left there. So 1 step backward, 2 steps backwards, I cut off the firewall and the recess that I'd originally made. I made a new outer firewall. I've made these new toe boards, and I wanted to get the steering column mounted because the angle of the steering column dictates where the lower column mount needs to be on the outer firewall, so that's in place. Also, the hood hinges, because of the geometry of the firewall, those two are interrelated, so I had to make custom stainless scissor hinges that worked with the angle that the firewall is at so that the hood will open and close properly. And now I'm ready to make this recess. Once I get the new recess made, I'll be able to put in the outer firewall with the recess and the toe boards and weld all of that in, and then I can move on to other pieces like making the floors and welding up some of the seams from chopping and sectioning on the cab. So this is a prototype part that I made, and I've actually gone through several iterations where I keep reducing the size of the firewall recess until I got it to the point where it's just absolutely couldn't be any smaller. In fact, with the width that I have it now, there isn't actually room for the exhaust headers. So I will have to create a coved recess that will come into the cab with clearance just for the rear header on the driver's side. And over here on the passenger side, the clearance for this back spark plug is too tight, and I believe I'll have to make a little coved recess for this back spark plug as well. So that's okay, because it's more important that I'm able to sit in this and drive it and enjoy the vehicle than take the engine in and out, change the headers, that sort of thing. So I made this as small as I possibly could. So this is the final outside size. The outer firewall has an opening exactly this size in it. So what I don't like about this part, though, is I did not leave enough material to do a turned edge to be able to roll into that outer firewall. So as an example of that, this was another prototype part that I had made. This is smaller than the original firewall recess panel, but still larger than this one. So you can see on the video, I hope, that there is a 3/4 inch radius, 90-degree rolled flange all the way around. So when this is installed, this aims directly at the outer firewall, and it's a pretty simple matter to just put a flat strip in to fill between the outer firewall and the recess. This one also has a rolled flange here around this area to work as a target for this part of the transmission tunnel. However, this one is too wide, so we'll set that aside, use that on some other project. This one is okay, except I don't have enough material to do the rolled flange. So 3rd time, 4th time lucky, I hope. So I've made a pair of hammer forms to build a new recess panel. One of them has this 3/4 inch radius rolled lip so that I'll be able to hammer form a flange going toward the engine. And these will be assembled, of course, in a different orientation. This side has a rolled flange or a rolled edge here to be able to form a flange for the transmission tunnel. And I also have these windows cut out in them. And what I'm going to do is use an operation on the Pullmax to form a recessed panel in here. That technique is sometimes called the sandwich method. So it is actually a kind of hammer forming, in my opinion. You could do this with just a corking tool and a hammer. But it's for me, it'll be a lot more efficient and a lot smoother result to do it with the Pullmax. So that's how I'm going to do it. So that's the story. I'm about ready to make this part. Hopefully, this is the last one. Okay, so I've got my hammer form assembly all put together. I have it assembled with machine screws. These are number 832 machine screws. Usually when I'm hammer forming a part, I don't bother with machine screws. I just use some pieces of welding rod, and these work as pins. I drill some 1/8 inch holes, and I put these pins in. And when I do the forming operation, I clamp it down to my welding bench. It's a heavy bench, so it doesn't move around. And I clamp it down to keep everything sandwiched snugly, and then I do the hammer forming operation. The reason I'm using machine screws in this case is once the hammer forming is done, I'm going to go to the Pullmax and make these raised pads. And when I do that operation, this needs to stay clamped tightly together, and I can't put C-clamps on it and slide it across the table. You'll see what I mean when we get to that stage. So when you're hammer forming something like this, generally you don't want to work one area completely over. You want to work in stages. So maybe work at 1/3 of the way over around the entire part and then come back and work at another 1/3. So you want to work it down gradually and evenly. So that's to keep it in control and to keep from introducing any unwanted shrinking or stretching to the edge. Since these corners are the hard spot, the place where I expect to have the most difficulty, my plan is to start here. I'm going to do some initial work on this corner, and then I will do the first pass of work on this corner. Then I'll work across the top and down the sides, and then I'll come back around and do additional passes. But I want to get this started so that I can get the shrink going here, and I don't want to trap. The reason I'm not starting, say, from the corner over here and working around is I don't want to trap any more material here that I will have to shrink than absolutely necessary. So by starting here, I'll shrink what I can. There will inevitably be a little bit of metal that will want to push out this way, and it'll be easier to shrink it away from the corner. So that's my strategy, at least. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to put on my hearing protection and start hammering. I'm going to start with a square hammer that has a face. This one is curved top to bottom, and this one is curved side to side. So I'm going to use this one because I believe I can get in nice and tight with that and make sure that I start the bend right at the base of the radius where it needs to. So I don't want to start hitting out here at the very edge. I want to start hammering as close as possible to where the radius bend needs to start. So that's my approach. Another thing I do sometimes is use just a simple corking tool. This is just a piece of scrap aluminum, and I've just sanded the face so it has a very slight radius across the length and a slight radius across the front. And then I can use this to direct a hammer blow exactly where I need it. Okay, so that went reasonably well. There's some marks in that from hammering, but that will all sand out very easily. The shrink on these corners worked out really well, but I think I'm ready to start forming this flange now. And you can certainly see plenty of hammer marks on here. I'm going to spend a little time just planishing this around and making sure that if there are any little bubbles or undulations in here, I smooth them out as best I can. There will inevitably be some surface marks from the hammer, from all the hammering. You know, I'm not a pro. I'm just a guy in a garage somewhere in the Midwest trying to make the best stuff I can. Okay, set up over here at the Pullmax. I have this same sandwich assembly hammer form that we've been using. I haven't changed anything here, and you'll remember that it has the same exact window cut out in the bottom piece of MDF. So the setup here is I have this upper die, which is just a piece of round shaft, maybe 1.125 in diameter, 1.25 inches. The edges are slightly rounded on it, and the face is flat. And then I have attached to the lower tool holder this steel table, just as a work rest. So unlike other tooling on the Pullmax, these two tools, the upper and lower tool, don't actually align or mesh together. This just supports, the table supports the whole sandwich, and this die will be pushing against the metal into the cavity formed by the lower piece of MDF and guided by this upper piece of MDF. So I'm going to turn on the tool, turn on the Pullmax, lower the tool, and just trace around this opening. So, and the way it's set up right now is when the die is at the full stroke length, I raised the table until it just touched the metal and then brought it up about another 3/4 of a turn. So just to start the forming, I expect we'll go a half a turn at a time and make 4 or 5 passes around this. We'll just keep an eye on it and see how it goes. So I'm going to put on some hearing protection and fire up the Pullmax. All right, so I've got a good 1/8 inch of depth. I could go quite a bit further, but I think that's a good place. I don't need a lot of depth on this particular part, so I'm going to take it out and we'll do the other side.
Here's the finished panel. I'm really pleased with it. I ended up with a 1/4 inch raise on the two panels. The rolled flanges look absolutely great. I've mocked the panel up in the cab, welded up the holes from the machine screws in the hammer form, and I put some copper-based weld-through primer everywhere where there are overlapping panels. One other detail I took care of was to cut out these beads that were in the original floor, right in the area where the toe boards attach, and I made some extensions to give a little more support there. I was surprised when I measured the original floor thickness. It was no more than 20 gauge thick, which is a little surprising for a 1950s American-made truck. So everything I'm doing is 16 gauge, so this should be super stout.
So I've been busy off camera. I've got the firewall recess made. The raised areas were done on the pullmacks. The rolled edges here and here were done with an MDF hammer form. I welded some flat strips of 16 gauge to the sides, finish welded these on the bench, and then I just sloppily MIG tacked them in to get this mocked up in place. So this is all good. Let me explain what this is about. So I made the decision to make this firewall recess as small as I possibly could. When I originally built the truck, it was as wide as the middle of the frame rail. So I've narrowed it up by, what is that? That's at least 5 or 6 inches on each side, and moved it forward here. It was back further before. That gives me a barely adequate amount of room for my feet. It did not give me room for the exhaust clearance. So this rear exhaust port on the Caddy V8 on the driver's side just did not clear this recess. And I knew that. That was a conscious decision because it was more important that my feet have room than that I have a generous amount of room for my exhaust system to be comfortable. That said, the exhaust system is still an important thing. So what I did is after I got these pieces in place, I roughly cut away enough metal from the recess and the firewall and the toe board so that I could bolt on my block hugger header. And then I shaped this piece out of 16 gauge steel. And I'm pretty happy with it. I've got a good fit. It's snug around all of the surfaces. That took several hours of hammering. All of this rolled edge was done with a hammer and a T-dolly. And as I've said, 16 gauge is not the most user-friendly material, especially for hand work. But I got it done, and I'm happy with this. I've got a good fit everywhere. And my plan is to cut the surrounding metal so that this piece will butt weld to those. And later, I will hammer and dolly this and get the seams perfectly aligned and weld them up. And it will pretty much be invisible once that's done. So there's two ways of doing this, of butt welding a patch like this into the adjoining metal. And the way I've typically done it is I use clecos or clamps to hold it in position. I put die-cam on, and I use a sharp scribe, and I scribe around the part. Sometimes I'll put a ruler across here and make a witness mark, which will give me something to align the two pieces later. That's not going to work very well in this case, and here's why. The 16 gauge is tough to cut, at least for me, with hand snips. So I could do it. I could get it cut as close as I could. I could use cutoff wheels and a die grinder to sneak up to the line. I think that would probably work. It'd be a lot of fussing around, but I could get it done that way. But instead, I've seen a technique that's called cut and butt. And the gist of that is you use a pneumatic body saw with a thin, fine-tooth blade, and you cut around the part or through both parts. I've seen it done both ways. In one case, you have the parts overlapped and maybe even the patch piece tack welded in the overlap position. And then you cut through both pieces at once at a 45-degree angle. And if you do that, you can imagine, instead of a butt weld, if you had a 45-degree angle between the two panels, the part won't drop through. You'll have that beveled edge where on both parts where they will try to line up as best they can, and it makes it a little, in principle, easier for tacking. I think what I'm going to do, I've got just enough gap right here that I can start my body saw, and I'm going to put a couple of additional clicos in here, and then I'm going to saw exactly along the edge here, and I will slightly tip it in, so that will minimize having any gaps from the thickness of the blade. And I'll saw a small section and then hammer and dolly that so that the edges are in alignment, and put a couple of tack welds on it. And then I'll do the next section and repeat, and the next section, and I'll just work my way all the way around. To really finalize this, I need to pull the engine out. There's no way I'm going to be able to hammer and dolly these seams around here and around here with the engine in place. There just isn't enough clearance. And in fact, the reason I haven't put the filler strip here in the top is so that I have the ability to reach through here later and hammer and dolly those areas to get them nice and tweaked and in line. So I think that's as far as I'm going to take this video. The next step for me is to start building the floorboards. That should be, famous last words, should be a whole lot less involved than the firewall with the steering mount and the hinge mounts and the exhaust clearance and the recess. It should be fairly straightforward. I'm going to make as flat a floor as I can. I have to make the transmission tunnel, which will come down this way and then hug the transmission going towards the back of the cab. So that's where we'll pick up in the next video. Drop some comments. Let me know what you think. If you like what I'm doing, let me know. If you have suggestions or there are things you'd like to see, let me know that too. Love it if you'd subscribe, click notifications, or click like even. The reason I'm doing these videos is because I like making them, and because it helps me focus and think through what I'm doing on this project. No ulterior motives. I just kind of want to share the little that I know and be able to share the progress on this. So that's a wrap for this video. I will catch you guys in the next episode.